The language you use in church matters. And if you want your church to be a welcoming space for guests who don't have any experience with church, you need to stop using insider language and explain what you mean in plain, everyday language. In this video, I'll give you 5 tips for doing just that. Hello again, I'm Larry Witzel with Ministry Insights from SermonView. We've got some great videos coming up on topics like social media marketing, using video effectively, and innovation tactics to grow your church. So make sure you subscribe so you'll be notified when new content is released. We had a guest speaker at our church once who started the sermon by saying this: "A few years ago, I went on an ASI mission trip to West Africa Union with Elder Schneider." The speaker then launched into a story, and this sentence established credibility with a few insiders, but most people in the room didn't understand that ASI was a business owner organization focused on evangelism, that the West African Union is not a labor union, but a sisterhood of churches in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, or that Elder Schneider was at that time the president of a national association of about 5,000 churches. This sentence completely excluded all the new members and guests, and I watched several people in the congregation completely check out. See, the language we use matters, and in church, the language we use has the potential to include or exclude your guests. Now, every field of expertise develops its own vocabulary of shortcut words. In law, for example, you might hear the term habeas corpus, which refers to the legal right to challenge unlawful detention. In medicine, a doctor might mention myocardial infarction, which has specific diagnostic meaning, even though you and I would simply call it a heart attack. And in engineering, a phrase like load-bearing capacity is used to describe how much weight a structure can safely support. Engineers understand that phrase to include all of the complex physics behind it. These terms are useful for experts because they pack a lot of meaning into a single word or phrase. But for someone outside that field, they can be confusing and even alienating. Well, church culture is no different. We often use words and phrases that are second nature to us, but leave newcomers feeling lost. Walking through church doors for the first time is hard enough. The last thing you want is to use language that makes them feel excluded. You want them to feel like insiders, not outsiders. Neil Gordon once wrote, "Effective communication values the recipient over the sender." You need to think about the needs of your guests and speak to them in a way that they understand. So, here are 5 tips for using more inclusive language to help your guests get past their discomfort and actually connect with your church. First, the obvious one. Theology as a field of study has developed its own vocabulary of shortcut words. When I took systematic theology in college, we talked about propitiation in our discussion of soteriology and Christology. But don't use these words from the pulpit without explaining them. Even a theological term like grace needs to be unpacked. Don't assume that your members really understand it, much less your guests. When you're bringing the ancient texts and applying it to our lives today, use today's language to explain it. So, unpack theological words. Second, some churches use weird terms to describe parts of the church building. For a while, I went to a church that didn't call the entrance area of the church the lobby. They called it the narthex. Now that one may seem obvious, but what about the word sanctuary? We know that that's the main meeting area for your church, but would a guest with no previous church experience know that? If you use the word sanctuary, get in the habit of describing what you mean, that it's the worship center or the main meeting room. It's really important that your greeters understand this, because if they're directing someone to go where they should go, they need to use language that the guest understands to help them get there. Third, if your church uses printed materials like magazines or study guides, explain what it is. Don't just assume that everyone knows what Our Little Friend is or the Quarterly. And really, what even is a bulletin? I would encourage a Seventh-day Adventist church to put something like this on that page. Our Bible study time on Saturday morning begins at 9:30 and is called Sabbath School. Most of our adult Bible study classes use a 13-week study guide published 4 times a year called the Sabbath School Quarterly. And if you don't have your own copy of the Quarterly, please tell the greeter or Sabbath School teacher and we'll get you your own complimentary copy. So in 2 sentences, I've explained that Sabbath school is the weekly Bible study and that the quarterly is the study guide. Plus, there's a bonus sentence that helps them feel included by knowing that if you don't have one, we'll give you your own quarterly. Explain the publications. Fourth, if you mention an institution from up front, explain what it is. At my church, if I need to mention the conference from up front, I explain what it is. Our church is part of a sisterhood of churches in Western Oregon and Southwest Washington called the Oregon Conference. And today we have one of our Oregon Conference leaders here to share with us. Don't say the Academy, say Columbia Adventist Academy, the private high school in our town that our church supports financially. Don't say the hospital, say Adventist Health Ukiah Valley, where a number of our church members work. I can't tell you how many longtime members of my church have no idea what the NAD is, so don't use these verbal shortcuts when guests are present. Don't assume people know all of your institutions. And finally, greet people using colloquial expressions. In my faith tradition, it's common to greet people with the phrase, Happy Sabbath. But what does that even mean? Back to that page on your website specifically for guests, you might prepare a guest for that greeting. For example, you might write, when you arrive at church on a Saturday morning, you might be greeted with a hearty Happy Sabbath. That's a traditional Seventh-day Adventist greeting expressing our appreciation for your presence and our gratitude for the Sabbath rest that this day contains. Language matters. You don't necessarily need to change your church vocabulary, and it's probably going to feel weird adding all this explanation to things that you already understand. But this isn't about your comfort, it's about valuing your guests. If you use a word or phrase that wouldn't be clearly understood by someone with no background in your church, explain it. Include them. It'll help them feel welcome and reduce the barriers to their connecting with people in your community of faith. If you're a pastor or church leader, I just want to affirm the work that you're doing. God has placed you in your position at this church, at this moment in Earth's history, and He has you there for a reason. God wants to do something special through you that He can't do through anyone else. So stay strong, be courageous. Thank you for your faithfulness. I love you guys. I'm cheering for you. We'll see you next time.